When everything is gone, I'm going to rephrase that. When everything seems silent in the world, and everything seems gone, and there seems like there's no way that it'll all come back. Seems like there's no possibility of anything being able to happen that'll make you happy, that'll bring your spirits up, that'll lead you into a direction, an interesting direction, albeit. Again, there's always that one thing that even though it's not always steady, it's steadfastly growing. It's not a pain that lives within you. It's not a thought that invades you. It's a familiar name that your mind remembers. It's a familiar thing that reminds you of a simpler time, a more peaceful time, a silenter time, a time of times before the tides arise, a time of times before your eyes blinked away from the true lovable sight of life. A single phrase harks back to you in that time of indecision, of silence, of absolute cautiousness. A time in which, although it seems as if you're on the cusp of many things, you don't reach out to grab to them. Because you don't want to do just one thing. You only want to be able to do... You don't want to do just one thing. You want to do multiple things. So you don't grab on to just one thing. You want to grab on to multiple things. And I'm not talking about just 2 things. I'm talking about 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. All the way to infinite things. But you can't grab on to infinite things because you don't have infinite hands. Nothing has infinite hands that exists. Imaginary things can have infinite hands. Although infinity exists, it's not something we can possess or hold or control. We can't control infinity. And so we lay in silence, awaiting the next thing, reaching out to the next thing, to the multiple things we want to do. We reach out, we hear different phrases, minds, lessons, things we were told or taught in the past hark back to us. They recall to us as small little figments of a large thought, of a long lost point in time in which everything seemed great, seemed peaceful, seemed memorable, seemed beautiful. It harks us back to a time of times where we'd be outside. We'd go to the movies. We'd have troubles. Or I wouldn't have troubles. A time of times that has passed in which we'd feel free. We'd feel as if we could do everything and anything, and how it seemed as if there was no consequence to anything. A time of times in which we were taught a series of lessons we either took in and thought about and applied it to our day-to-day life. A time of times in which everything seemed possible, probable. Time of times in which if you got money for Christmas, you'd spend it on that next game or that next set of makeup or that next time you'd go out with your friends. You'd save it. You'd save it for a while. But you'd spend it immediately. You wouldn't think. A time of times in which you wouldn't think about how the future would go. You wouldn't think about if your friends were to separate from you. A time of times in which you were carefree and you didn't want to think about the possibility of what would happen next. A time of times in which all you did was believe in a world that was free from the darkness. A time of times which from time to time told you multiple lines to stay away, to back away, to never express how you felt or change how you felt, never to stray away from the norm, to stay similar, to ride with the wave, and to not break off and make your own wave. A time of times in which all seemed fine. Before the storm, before the burning days, the haze which invaded our eyes, which covered our eyes. A time of time which invoked those olden polar nights. You hearken back to that time. You remember that time. And you love that time. A time of times. It withered away. And all you're left to do is just remember it. Because that time of times is past. And you think now, after that time of times is past, now that you've finished thinking about that time of times, which had an untimely end, all you're left with at the end of your thoughts are phrases, people, ideas, butterscotch, robes, tethered robes, old lights, old clothes, and neutral air. You're left with the phrase. A single phrase re-enters your brain. A single phrase re-enters your brain. And what is that phrase? What is that phrase? I ask you. What is that phrase?